Hello everybody and welcome to another episode of the Q&A. I'm going to bust this one out just before I go back into the World vs. World test stuff for the Edge of the Mist and hopefully do a video for you guys on that tomorrow. There were also loads of questions. I don't know whether I'm just sort of excited by things or very enthused at the moment. The people had that I just felt like it was bang on the last episode we did. I was just reading more and more questions and every single one I've put in my little notepad here. So we might see a double Q&A go up this week at some point because there's just so much I feel like I can talk about. But we'll see how that goes. So I've just grabbed some of the most recent ones from our last Q&A because that might include stuff about the patch, which I have lots of thoughts on. But yeah, let's just get stuck in it. The footage in the background as well is the most recent patch. It's the fractal stuff. It's me doing a group foolishly on my engineer with like no agony resist at all. I had 10 agony resist, which I could swap in at the end, but it was a very interesting experience. In general, fractals, you're okay going through with no agony resist, honestly, until like you get to more, and then you're going to get universally hit with that thing. But as long as people can res you up, you should be okay as long as you know what to dodge. However, there are obviously new fractals about now, so we get very stuck at the boss at the end. There'll probably be a significant amount cut out. Apologies to everyone who was on my team and got frustrated. I do feel like I was the sole cause of our issues there, but we managed to get through it anyway. So yeah, that's the footage in the background. Ritlock Critstone asked, hey WP, what do you think of ArenaNet selling the human cultural tier 3 armor on the gem store? Do you think it was a good idea, or does it just tarnish the idea of race-exclusive armor sets? And do you think we could be seeing more of this in future? I hope not. I think this was a terrible idea, and I think they must have known it was a terrible idea. For people that don't know, okay, obviously in Guild Wars 2 there are cultural armors that you can get. They're actually incredibly expensive. The tier 3 in particular will cost you about 100 gold, more than that alone to buy. There's some of the more prestigious things you can go for in Guild Wars 2. There's a pretty fancy title as well called the Emperor, which you can get for collecting all of the tier 3 armor. Okay, the other thing about cultural armor is only one specific race should be able to wear it. At launch, you could like preview racial armor even if you weren't on their race, and then it would just make your character look naked, which was quite funny, and everyone was like, Barbie and Ken dolls, which eventually ArenaNet patched out. So presumably, these armors were made specifically for certain races and would clip horribly if you tried to wear the Asuran stuff on a Norn. It would clip horribly and it would look really stupid and weird, okay? It'd be like you're in a mini top and a mini skirt or something. This was the established system. You could go for these really high-end armors. I don't actually think many of them look that great. And a lot of the new armors ArenaNet put in the game, especially through the gem store, tend to look a lot better, a lot more flashy, have more effect and stuff. But whatever, they were there and they were an option for people. Now you can buy off of the gem store the human tier 3 cultural stuff. So this prestigious thing, people spend a lot of time going for, earning all of that gold to go ahead and buy. You can now just get straight up for gems. What's even more stupid is that this human tier 3 light stuff is now actually available on all races. So whatever these limitations were that were implemented, only one race can wear them for this identity, maybe it wasn't a technical thing at all. Or if it was a technical thing, then why did ArenaNet recycle these armors? Presumably they're recycling the tier 3 light because they want to save up on efforts, right? They want to have something they can sell in the gem store but not have to spend loads of time making up for. So let's just reuse the tier 3 light stuff. But then that could have been a load of effort anyway for them to actually remodel it and shape it to the other races. So, but the worst thing is, the thing that really takes the cake is it looks better. I mean, it's subjective, but they've improved. They've had fire basically all over this set of armor. So not only can people buy your cultural armor that you spent all of this time on, but they can buy it and look flashier than you. And there is something to be said for, there's already loads of flaming armors that are out in the game, and some people subjectively wouldn't like it. But I do think that in general, people enjoy the fiery stuff, and the fiery stuff sells, so I can see why they're making it look fiery. But it just seems like a very, very weird thing to do. And it's not the same for the medium, it's not the same for the heavy. They just kind of tried to slip it on by there. Seems like a really dangerous path for ArenaNet to go down, and kind of an upsetting one too. My only rationalization for this is that perhaps, like, we saw them reuse the Aqua Breather as well last patch. I wonder if they're trying to do these gem store things and they're maybe strapped for time for some reason, maybe because they're working on a bigger content release. I do a podcast on Matt Visual's channel where we talk for like hours at a time about Guild Wars 2, and we've discussed over there this idea that maybe there's a bigger living story release that could be coming, particularly even to do with the Tengu quite recently, and maybe this is why we're seeing them be so cheeky with the gem store stuff, but it doesn't seem good to me. It really doesn't, and I hope we don't see more of that kind of stuff. To append this question, ArenaNet have actually removed this stuff from the gem store now since I recorded this. They saw the big backlash from the community, lots of people were talking about it, and they even posted in the forums. This was a really good opportunity, I guess, for them to shine in some ways, and in some ways to look a bit, you know, foolish and others. But basically they turned around and said, yeah, we've had a look, sometimes we're going to be reusing just the meshes. I mean, they're going to be doing different textures, but it is essentially the same thing mesh wise, and we've had a look at the fact that we did this with the cultural. It wasn't a good idea. We're going to rein it back in, we're going to change it. Anyone who already bought the light will have it for the meantime, but then when we change it, it's going to go back up for sale, and everybody's going to have the new version instead. We're sorry about this, it was pretty weird. Hopefully it won't happen again. So they've looked at it and removed it. Why did it go out there in the first place is kind of what the naysayers would be saying now. And it just looks like maybe crossed wires of communication somewhere. You know, the artists, the people that decide, oh hey, we're gonna add some new armor to the game. Maybe they just had a big gallery of meshes to look at, and they picked a couple, and it turned out one of them was from the cultural. And that was a big mistake that no one really caught until far later on, once it finally went out. So that could have been what happened. I have left this question in, though. I know it's taken 5 minutes, but I've left this in because I feel it's important that people do know that this happened, and it spawns a little bit of discussion about other things too, so we can watch out for it in the future. Lewis Fleming, who says, hey WP, love your videos. I'm wondering one thing, what's your hotkey bind setup? Always wondered, as you've never really shown it off. I won't stick on this question for very long. I do feel like I need to come back to it every now and then. I've had a lot of people asking me this recently because of my engineer footage, in which you'll see me running in all directions while throwing grenades constantly. I use a Razer Naga. I actually don't recommend the mouse whatsoever because this is the third one I've had. They've all been gifts, but this is the third one I've had, and they've all broken on me. This one's really annoying. If you watch my draft building series, you'll know that the right click on it completely messes up quite often, but it's a nice mouse for being able to use all of your skills. My keybind setup is entirely reliant on that mouse. Every single skill I use in Guild Wars 2 I activate with my thumb on my right hand. It's all there, and it's all very easy to push, and functionally the mouse is nice. It's just that they break constantly, and I have a feeling that's got something to do with Razer. So that's how that works, and it allows me on engineer to, like, I can kite away at full speed, hit the look behind me hotkey, and throw grenades at will behind me to, like, chill people and stuff. It's pretty cool. But yeah, it's entirely reliant on the mouse, and that's why you see on the bottom of my screen it doesn't actually say where I've bound my skills to. It's because they're all on the numpad technically, and Guild Wars 2 doesn't show that on its UI. The next question is from Alicia Villa, who says, hey WP, I've already tried to ask this before, but maybe you missed it. Have you noticed that Scarlet mentioned Malik in one of the nightmare chambers? She said that it was very naughty that we kept that secret from her. Yeah, I did hear about this. I'm not sure what we can extrapolate from it in the story. To fill people in, Malik is probably the subject of one of the greatest arcs of the personal story for Guild Wars 2. If you play as a Sylvari and you make the right choices, where life goes, so too shall I believe is the one you make a character creation. You get to experience this story where you find out about a Sylvari from another pale tree. This was actually the topic of one of the very first Guild Wars 2 mysteries videos I did. I think it was, at least. If it isn't, then that should definitely be one I do one on. And you get like this really cool cryptic poem. Yes, it definitely was. It was the very first Guild Wars 2 mystery I ever did. They give you this cryptic poem that sounds a lot like something we saw in the first game. Very, very interesting character. Scarlet could perhaps tie in somehow. She's a big agenda of hers is she doesn't want to be what the pale tree wants her to be, and yet she doesn't want to turn to nightmare either. Well, there is this other tree, and Malik was a fascinating character because he was decidedly neutral about everything. Like, he was completely free of the influence of anything else, right? He didn't care about the pale tree. He was just so neutral and so cognitive in his decisions. He was a really interesting character. And actually, if you think about it, given everything that's going on with Scarlet and that she's got this big agenda, you'd think there would have been more by now already about this other tree, right? I mean, there's so many things I appreciate that the writers have to consider when they do these stories, but like, it would have been perfect to have talked about this. We are seeing it now inside the tower. Inside the Tower of Nightmares, there is this vision, and Scarlet lets us know, ooh, I know about Malik as well. Doesn't mean anything, though, because at the same time she said, ooh, I know about the Infinity Ball. Does it mean anything? Do any of these theories have any warrant? How are ArenaNet just giving, you know, cursory nods to these things without honouring them? And I doubt they will. I'm sorry, I doubt that they will. A lot of people have been upset. I'm going to talk more about Scarlet in another question down below. But, you know, a lot of the time, they just don't have space to give us that much lore, I think, or the inclination at least. Think about the current Fractals update. For if you haven't played it yet, now when you go inside the Fractals and the Mists, it will play that trailer that we saw, the cutscene, the really nice concept art cutscene. You can choose to skip it. But what they did, instead of it just being like a trailer, is there's actually dialogue now. Dessa is speaking to you, and you can see the text scrolling across the bottom of the screen. It's really cool. For the and maybe the trailer is what, 5 minutes long, less than that, 3 minutes, and it's really cool for the first 45 seconds that Des is talking to you, and then she stops, and then it's just dead air. There's nothing else for her to say. And I think that is a perfect example of the way that the writing is going in this franchise at the moment. The way that they have to piecemeal story out so much, and how lost they are for how much they can really deliver. Someone was given a job. Right, Dessa is going to speak to the players through this trailer, okay? Dessa's going to speak to them. Give Dessa something interesting to say to introduce this dungeon. And they couldn't even give her enough worthy dialogue, enough lore, enough intrigue to last the full trailer. They only gave us 45 seconds worth, and then it's just dead air. I was looking at all that dead space and thinking, wow, you had this opportunity to write more stuff for Dessa here, and it could have been voice acted. I'm assuming here that wouldn't have been an issue. It could have been done, and whoever wrote that didn't have the creativity or the thought or the enthusiasm. I don't even know what to blame it on. Like, it can't have been a choice to have just had the start of that cutscene and nothing else. Blatant space for story that was just neglected because maybe they didn't have enough to say, and that's the problem, because I feel like a lot of members of this community, and I do to an extent move myself away from that because I actually don't feel too creative recently, but there are a lot of members of this community that could easily have filled all of that up with interesting stuff that Dessa could have to talk about. Dessa herself is a pretty interesting character. But anyway, I digress. Malik is interesting. Will Scarlet have something more significant to do with him? I doubt. The main reason why I doubt this, I should say, is the devs have said there is a definite end in sight for Scarlet. She has been met by so much baffling vitriol that there is now an end date for her, and she has been written out at some point. There is a definite end, and I guess we'll see that when we see it. I'm assuming it will be within like this 4-month window that it takes ArenaNet to develop content for. And then that will be that. So I think this angle with Malik and the other Pale Tree that they could have gone with for Scarlet and maybe would have been more interesting, we've probably missed. It's just a sailed ship. There's more I can say on the topic. I'm going to just go on to the next question though. Which is from iFire, or IP Hire, who says, why does everyone want ArenaNet to rush out an expansion? When we look at WoW, Burning Crusade came out 3 years after the original. I believe that we won't see an expansion for Guild Wars 2 for quite some time. What do you believe ArenaNet can do in order to get people to come back without an expansion? I think you're completely right. I think that long-term timescale, we're only 1 year down the line. It's very easy to draw comparisons to Guild Wars 1, but Guild Wars 1 was incredibly unique in the way it delivered content, and it was a very bright flame that burned out very quickly. You can look at that release window for Guild Wars 1 and be like, oh yeah, look, you had factions, and then you had Nightfall, and then you had Eye of the North a year later, but then that just ended. Like, and out of how many years has Guild Wars 1 been around now? 9 years? 8 years? Very little of that was actually with a lot of content going into the game. It had to stop. It was too much, too fast, and I'm sure ArenaNet are wary of that. And if you compare it to more general MMOs, then this is not out of the ordinary whatsoever. And people saying, oh, it's too late for an expansion, I don't really agree with. I think that they're still well within time to do an expansion, and there's just going to be a dip in the player base, and there's going to be a rise in negativity as people become more accustomed to the game and sort of realize that they know more about the game than the devs do. You know, you watch a live stream and it's very easy to pick at their gameplay and feel like you're better and you know better and everything they're doing is wrong. You know, that generally rises as players spend more time with the game. That's how communities go. So why am I asking so much for an expansion? I wouldn't mind if it was still too... well, would I mind? I think I wouldn't mind if it was still, you know, over a year until we got some kind of expansion. The main reason why I want to know one's coming, though, to have at least something be announced, is because I feel like that shifts the community in a big way. If you feel like there's something large on the horizon, even if it's a very distant horizon, if you feel like there's something large on the horizon, there's something to speculate about, there's some excitement for people, and people are less bitter when one of these small 2-weekly updates comes out and they feel like it hasn't satisfied them. If you know there's something else coming, something really big and substantive coming later, then you're not going to put so much pressure on the Living Story updates. And I do think much improvement needs to be done to the Living Story updates, but just this idea of the expansion being there and being worked on makes the Living Story to me feel much less like it's wasted. It works incredibly well as something to tide people over, to bridge that gap. And I don't think, especially right now, it can achieve the excitement and attract the community that a full-fledged expansion would. That's why I really want an expansion to be announced, because, and this is for me personally, I'd be way more enthused about things to come if I knew there was like one big arc that was on its way, one big blob of content. Now, there are many different things Arena could be doing. Let's not forget, they haven't said no to expansions. They still have not said no to expansions. So I do still believe it's very much on the table. I just sort of implore them that if they are secretly working on one, or even a big Living Story update, it needs to be pushed out to the community, because I think, especially when they're looking for real feedback about their game, a lot of people can get very upset, you know, they're impassioned, they get very upset, and then they give terrible feedback on the forums, and it's just filled with personal attacks and name-calling and rubbish that probably would be lessened to a great degree if people sort of still had this idea of this expansion to cling on to. That's what enthuses me about it so much. Anyway, let's move on to the next question from Loza, who says, "Hey Woody, why do you dislike Guild Wars 2's Mesmer when compared to that of Guild Wars 1? They were just very different kettles of fish. The Guild Wars 2 Mesmer has a really interesting role, and I feel like it is something that I've never seen in another game. Like, it really, if you think about the Guild Wars 2 Mesmer, especially if you're playing like a shatter spec, it's this idea of creating loads of mobs around you that you detonate on command, and it's like, in a weird way, playing sort of a meta game about moving them into the right positions, and it's just very bizarre gameplay. It really is. And it's fun to an extent. I actually think it's very damaging as well. Like, they want talking from a PvP sense, they want it to be really spectator friendly. This game has way too many ads and summons and things people can just throw around that just obscures battles to an unnecessary extent, and Mesmers are the worst for this. I think they're really, really bad and really poorly designed, just fundamentally as a class. When you think about like spectating stuff like PvP, it's just terrible. But aside from that, in terms of actually playing a Mesmer, I think they're pretty interesting in Guild Wars 2. However, that's not what I was looking for with them, and while I find them interesting, I still find stuff like Elementalist and Engineer to be far more engaging, and still to have more tricks than even the Mesmer does. The Guild Wars 1 Mesmer was something that really captured me. I hold no doubts that one of the biggest reasons why I really enjoy the Guild Wars 1 Mesmer was because it was my first class, it was my main, and I sort of harbour maybe a bit of a subjective love for them. But that said, I became very accustomed to their gameplay, either the way you would run a Mesmer. I became very accustomed to how their skills work, and I was looking forward to enjoying that in Guild Wars 2 as well, and there's just no option for it. And in fact, one of the earliest Guild Wars 2 videos I did, back when I was doing my WTF No series, one of the earlier ones I did, it wasn't one of the more popular ones, but I did one on how can there be a Mesmer in Guild Wars 2? Because Guild Wars 2 is so different to the first game. The Mesmer in the first game was about controlling energy, which doesn't exist in Guild Wars 2, and it was very much hex-based combat, and hexes don't exist in Guild Wars 2. Like, two of the fundamental mechanics of the Mesmer in Guild Wars 1, like, just do not exist in Guild Wars 2 at all. Another big mechanic of the Mesmer in Guild Wars 1 was the idea of fast casting, and cast times, while they exist in Guild Wars 2, because there's no multi-classing, the idea of fast casting sort of evaporates as well. And another big element of the Guild Wars 1 Mesmer was the idea of playing with signets. Signets in the first game being abilities that didn't cost any energy, and being completely different in Guild Wars 2 again. So you had all of these core pillars, functionally, of how Guild Wars 1 Mesmer worked, that just don't exist in Guild Wars 2 anymore. So before that class was very first announced, I did this video where I said, how can this class exist, basically? And the answer was that it exists in a completely different form. Another big thing that I've sort of been skirting around, but Guild Wars 1 Mesmers were about forcing your opponent, it was really messing with your opponent's mind. Like, you would hex them, and it meant whenever they attacked, they took damage. But then you would hex them again, and it meant if they didn't do anything, then they would also take damage. And you'd force your opponent to, in the heat of battle, when they've already got all these calculations going on about their own energy management and about who they should be targeting and how high their health is, when they should be healing, all this stuff that they have to deal with in combat, you as a Mesmer would dump a bunch more stuff on top of the other player. And it was mind games. It really was the original Mesmer. Now they have to think about, oh god, okay, I'm doing all of this stuff, but that Mesmer's just hexed me, so I need to get rid of this hex. Do I cast a spell to get rid of the hex? Do I try and wait for this signet to come off of cooldown so that I can get rid of this hex? Like, you would just throw all of this stuff, and I really felt like in the first game for Guild Wars 1, particularly PvP, like, Mesmer was sort of boring in PvE, frankly. But for PvP, Guild Wars 1 was very much mind games. It was who's smart, how can you really manage your stuff properly. And the Mesmer would just put out this insane pressure on the players themselves. And you would have these fantastic moments. Interrupts as well. Like, interrupts is such a small thing of Guild Wars 2. Yeah, we have CCs, but if you get interrupted in Guild Wars 2, the skill doesn't go on its full cooldown. It just goes on a base, like 1 second cooldown, right? In Guild Wars 2, if you interrupted someone, that skill would go on its full cooldown. So there were these great Mesmer builds where you'd be interrupting people in the right way. It was fantastic. It was a really, really cool class, and just none of that exists in Guild Wars 2. Everybody's familiar with the Zerker paradigm we're currently in. Oh, it's Zerk, 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 Zerk. Well, Guild Wars 1 Mesmer was very much about CC and control, and we all know how effective that is in Guild Wars 2. I've still got so many questions I'd like to go through, but the World vs. World thing is going to be happening soon, guys, so I'll just leave it on this last one. BrunoMe45 says, hey WP, will you play Guild Wars 3 one day when ArenaNet release it? Do you want it to be more like original Guild Wars, or more like Guild Wars 2? I really couldn't answer that question. I doubt there'll ever be a Guild Wars 3. I don't know how excited I'd be for a Guild Wars 3. If they said, right, we're scrapping it, we're doing Guild Wars 3. Okay, I do know I would be mortified. I would lose a lot of faith in them if they decided to do that. But they're not going to do that, so there's no need to doomsay. It would be an interesting prospect. You should ask me again sometime though about the idea of like a spin-off game, you know, that takes place maybe in a different period of time and is a completely different genre, single player RPG. Now we're talking. Now we're cooking with gas. I would play the hell out of that and maybe even enjoy it more than Guild Wars 2 itself, since I'm living for the story. But yeah, interesting question. So that's it, guys. Sorry about this. I will be back probably sooner than normal for the rest of these questions. Thank you very much for watching. Leave any more you may have. I've been very much enjoying this series, and I hope you all have a wonderful evening. I will see you tomorrow.